What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Soccer Wise. David Goss and Jordan Angeli with you. If you're watching live bright and early in the morning on the East Coast, Jordan is in the best time zone once again and showing it with her excited dance moves. Jordan, do you feel alive?
Wow, I feel very alive. The East Coast time zone is just like, it'll just get you right up and at 'em. 8 a.m. start time, you know. This is the life over here. You're really living it. I think I can see you from where I'm at. Hi, guys.
Yeah, that's me. No, not the one on the left, the one in the middle. Yeah.
Okay. That's where I was getting confused.
We're both Floridians right now for a little bit. You are getting ready for the NWSL season, getting ready to kick off for some broadcasts. It is going to be an exciting season. It's like kind of in this blind spot right now. It's right around the corner, and yet it feels far away at the same time, and that's been kind of confusing for me.
It is. And we come to this broadcast seminar, so I'm in Fort Lauderdale by our studio. We come to this broadcast seminar every year, and I kind of feel like this every year where I'm like, oh my gosh, the season is coming, and I am not ready.
Yeah.
But it's still a month away, but also with everything that's happened, Goss, I feel like I got some work to do because I don't, you remember I went for like a month and just vacationed and did nothing. So I got some work to do before season starts, but it's nice. It always kind of gets you jazzed up to get going again, and you see everybody and you're like, all right, here we go. It's time to boogie.
It is weird that the knowledge you gained on sails and seals and trails around New Zealand and pastries in Australia is not going to be essential to the broadcast.
Yeah, flat whites, the aficionado on flat whites is not going to help me that much.
Unless there's an Australian player.
True.
So everyone sign Aussies as you can.
And then I'll work that in somehow. I don't know. That's my job. I'll figure it out.
That'll be your 90-minute goal for every one of those matches is to work that in. We will talk a little bit about Australia because they are going to be part of the SheBelieves Cup. Jordan went over, she negotiated the deal and brought everyone back. And we have officially a roster for the U.S. women's national team. Emma Hayes dropping her first SheBelieves Cup roster. I don't even know if that's true. Was she the SheBelieves Cup coach last year? No, she took over after.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, wow. I said it with confidence and then got lost in the middle. So we've got a big roster to talk through. A ton of, I think, really interesting picks or non-picks that we will dig into as they get ready for this, which is at the end of February. So before the season kicks off, the U.S. will play against Australia, Colombia, and Japan in the SheBelieves Cup. So a lot to talk about there. And then we're going to dig in on Bay FC a little bit. They made another college signing, another big college signing over the course of the last week. It is their second, and I think they're one of those teams where they finished the year so different than they started that we kind of have to reset on the expectations, on how this team is put together, and some players that are going to be in that SheBelieves Cup conversation that we're going to have. So we're going to have a chance to dig in on them a little bit and maybe do some news after that if there's anything big that we want to hit on. But we start with the national team. It is the biggest story in women's soccer whenever something happens around the U.S. women's national team. We weren't totally sure what we wanted to dig in on today. And then boom, Emma Hayes in your face. Here's everything you need to talk about right up front. Let's start big picture. Her first SheBelieves Cup roster. Overall, the concept of what she's trying to do, the group she's put together. What was your first reactions? What do you make of what this tournament will be?
First reaction is Emma Hayes is true to her word. She wants to make this pool of players as wide as she can at the beginning and then narrow it down. And for me, the biggest thing that I see from this group is youth, players that are inexperienced. And I love this. I think that this is the exact time where you bring these players in and you don't bring them in with a full roster. You bring them in with a handful of people with a lot of experience who can set the tone for what the standard is. But you say, all right, we're looking at you. Go ahead and go prove it. Don't just prove it in a friendly against Iceland. Prove it in a competition where the United States has been very dominant over the years against three very good teams from three different continents. And you say, go figure out a way to win and show me that you deserve to be in this pool, not now, But in the future, Emma Hayes actually said in a press conference, I loved this. She said, we brought 6 players in from the U20 pool, and I want to see them in a competitive environment. I want to be bold in this selection because now is the time to take the risks, building in a larger pool. This year is about building and developing relationships and seeing what they can do under pressure. It's perfect for this because there is pressure on this team to win SheBelieves Cup. I think that is evident, right, from what they've done year after year. And now you get to see how these players do because with this roster, they're going to play.
I absolutely agree with you. I love how much Emma has sort of recognized the calendar and said, like, I've got a year and a half till the World Cup. I just won a gold medal. Now's my time. That was the point of the January camp, was to explore possibilities, to create different combinations, and then to continue it on here is great, and to continue to push young players into the camp in a program that has very much at times gotten stale quickly. When you win something, everyone's spot has been guaranteed after that. And so that's been a huge problem for the U.S. women's national team. It's something that was specifically stated around the Futures Camp and sort of the gap that's been created at times in the women's national team program of next generations not being ready to push through.
I'll just add to that. I don't feel like we've had this space, though, to bring in players like this because when you're saying if you win, the next team is just like your automatic year spot secured, that was due to the CBA. And a lot of it had to do with these players had guaranteed contracts and you could only bring a couple of players in, sprinkle them in here and there, and if they had too many camps, then they had to have a roster spot and you had to kick somebody out. So I think having this new CBA where there is freedom to call players in, and it's not a guarantee of the future. What you've done in the past is not a guarantee of your future. I think it's really beneficial to Emma Hayes, and she's using it to her benefit and to her delight here in this camp to see what these players really have.
Yeah, absolutely. The CBA was a huge part, I think, of players becoming solidified as those national team players, all going all the way back into the national team paying club contracts for some players, and therefore you couldn't bring players off those spots because they were who they were for the year. And it was there's never been a situation as well, not that there ever will be in competitive, but like, oh, I'm going to step away now, or like, oh, I understand maybe I shouldn't come to this camp. It was like, I have to be there. I have to be a part of this. And that has shifted a little, as you said, and Emma Hayes has taken advantage of it. Now, I think there are a few interesting spots of whether I wouldn't call them her favorites, but there are projects that she is clearly invested in where people are getting maybe more opportunity than other people. We'll talk about that as we get into it. But I completely agree with you of like, there's competition, there's opportunity here. There is some scouting being done by her in that there are pieces in this group that probably are not ready, but she wants them to be ready. She likes the skill sets they have. You think of a Giselle Thompson, probably not one that I would have said, yes, national team in 2025, but you see the roadmap of what she can be. And so I think you have some pieces like that, and Michelle Cooper maybe as well, where Emma Hayes clearly wants their skill set in the national team pool, wants players that can do what they do, likes what she's seen so far, and sort of is giving them that boost here to say, I believe in you, you can do more, I'll bring you into this environment, it will push you, that will start your year, and maybe you're able to achieve higher in an NWSL situation. And then you've got some pieces in here that are solid pieces of the national team, which you need, right? It has to be mix and match. It can't be, there has to be leaders in the group. So you need the Sam Coffeys, the Lindsay Heaps now, Tierna Davidsons, like those players who are going to lead from the front and help the pieces who are coming in understand what the U.S. women's national team program is about, and not just everyone trying to figure it out on the fly under an Emma Hayes. So I agree with you. I think this is a really good use of this camp. I also think, and this isn't 100% it, but like you still have the marketing material of like big names that are coming in that just won a gold medal to help sell tickets and get fans excited, because another part of this tournament is to bring the team to other parts of the country and let fans engage with the team even larger than what it would be in just a send-off series every once in a while and stuff like that. So I think all of that really works out here. The competition's going to be good. Japan, Australia, and Colombia, there are 3 teams very similar to what you should see at high-level international, and 3 teams that I think are in similar stages as the U.S. right now of being on the verge of competing in 2027, so sort of with eyes towards that same level of competition of trying to push to get into the later rounds there. Let's get into the roster and the names that pop out to you. I have a couple that I'm very excited about. Do you have anyone that you want to say first before I start yelling?
I would say I'm really happy to see Katerina Macario back. I think that for me, with the longevity of the injury that she had and just coming back, it's difficult. And not every ACL is the same, and the recovery isn't the same, and you don't always pop back to where you want to be at the spot you want to be at. And I think for her, it's been really challenging, right? She probably wanted to be on that Olympic roster, probably wanted to accomplish things that she felt like that was the time for it in her career. I'm excited to see her in this, and Emma Hayes knows her well. So how does Emma Hayes utilize her? I think she's one of those interesting ones. So I think just for I don't know, those always pull at my heartstrings. I want those players to succeed, and she is an excellent player and I think can really elevate this team. So that's who I'm excited for, but I think I'm going to be excited for who you're excited for.
Let me ask you this first before we dig into my names. Do you take anything from roster designations? And I ask this in saying Rose Lavelle is injured, so not a part of this group. Jaden Shaw is listed as a midfielder, and Katerina Macario is listed as a forward. Do you take anything from that in terms of if there is a 10, like Rose Lavelle played for much of the Olympics, which of those two could fill in that role?
Yes and no. I think you read into it a little bit, but you also know the player profile of these players. I think you could put Crystal Dunn in there too, because yes, Crystal Dunn could be an outside back, and there's very young outside backs in this roster. So maybe she's there listed as a defender to help those defenders. But I think there is going to be one of the things that we've seen with Emma Hayes is she wants players who can play multiple positions. And I think that's pretty evident. Like, I have a lot of question marks with some of these players, like where are they going to play?
Yeah.
But I think you could put Macario in as a 9 and have some really fun, with what her positioning is like, where she pops up, who is playing behind her that can get in beyond her, things like that. So yes and no. I think we could see her in the midfield. We could see her in the front line. I have no idea, Goss, but I think that's part of the fun with some of these players on this roster is their fluidity and their mobility and some of their positioning.
And we saw before Emma Hayes took over, Jaden Shaw playing that attacking midfield position for the U.S. Women's National Team. It feels like she will play along the front line for North Carolina for the most part. So that will be one of the interesting things, which I still don't know what her best position is, and I think that's a great thing for her because she is so good and capable of so many things. But it was interesting to see that's the way the roster felt, especially in a camp in which you don't have Rose Lavelle available. The players I'm most excited about, it starts with Claire Hutton. Thank God we got the call up for Claire Hutton. She is young, and she has been a part of the U20 national team in the last year. She was a part of the Futures camp in January. I think she's almost been a victim of that, which is because she was eligible for those things. She was not called into the full national team when I think from play and statistics in NWSL, she performed better than some of the players that have been called into camps since she started. And I get it. She's 20. There's years to come, and you don't have to rush everything. But at some point, you have to respect the talent, and you have to respect the performances. She has been one of the best two-way midfielders in NWSL. She is one of the best tacklers in NWSL, stopping transition moments, winning 50-50s, being physical in that central midfield area, and then being super composed and calm in possession. She also has played in really high leverage games already. Because Kansas City was, from the moment the season started, this must watch, every home game she's played in has been an atmosphere at the level of a big international game. She has played in Challenge Cup games. She has played in playoff games. She has played in all of these big competitions that that gives you a more experience than a young player does. And I think she can really add something to this midfield. I think when you look at the group outside of Sam Coffey, it was a lot of taking one aspect and giving one away. We want someone who's good in the tackle. We bring in someone in midfield. Emily Sonnet has played in there a little bit. Corbin Albert at times that then maybe you're not getting the progressive passing that you want and the possession that you want. And if you go the other way, maybe you're a little light physically in midfield and the ability to protect your back line and make things easier for your defenders. And it feels like that's where Claire Hutton fits into this midfield.
She is, I'm going back to the beginning of what you said, because I actually think it was beneficial for her not to be called into the national team until now. and not to have the camps on top of all the pressure. She was 18 her full rookie year. And progressing really quickly, getting thrown into this new situation. I think that this is good timing because you're going into your second year. You feel a little bit more confident. I think her growth, remember at the beginning of the year, Goss, we were watching her play and you knew defensively that is her strength.
Yeah.
Like defensively, she would know the places to funnel the ball, pick off the pass. But then it was, what is she doing after she picks off the pass? Was she completing the pass? Was she finding that next, was it progressive or was it just, let's just keep the ball? And I think as the year went on, she grew exponentially in that area of her game. And so it was growth that I felt like didn't have pressure on her to be like, now I'm going into national team camp and now I have to make this roster. It was just like, okay, let me do well on this team. Let me lead on the under 20s team. And now when the timing is right and there is a competition at hand, because I think Emma Hayes is also smart, like put this girl in a competition because she is uber competitive. Now let's see how she performs. I think this is going to be really interesting and in a great way for Claire Hutton. We're going to learn a lot about her at this next level. I love this. I think she is going to be on this team probably for a very long time because of all the qualities that you said. And she just turned 19. Like she is a baby when it comes to what she can do with this national team. Yeah, super stoked for her. And I think some of this competition will be really good for her when it comes to decision making, when it comes to, okay, how is Japan playing against me? And that's going to be way different than how Colombia's midfield plays against me. How do I make these decisions? How is my communication with Lindsay Horan or Lily Johannes in front of me? I think that is going to be a really cool, maybe the results are going to come for the women's national team this camp, and I hope they do with this young group. But I think we're going to learn so much about the young players, and that is what this is going to be about.
Wow. A few months ago, we did an episode going into the Olympics, and I was like, I think the U.S. could not win this tournament and have some really interesting findings, and it could be useful. And you go, that's not the U.S. women's national team.
But that's an Olympics. That's
fair.
The Olympics. That's
fair.
The Olympics.
Gold medals are more important than SheBelieves Cup. That's fair. I get your point 100%, and I think it's totally fair. And it was so quick, and we are in a new reality from the NWSL side of things with the U18 signing ability, and like, how do you manage these players? And I think Olivia Moutre is one that will come up, I think, over the next few weeks as people talk about these rosters. I don't think we're far away from talking about Kennedy Fuller as well, the year she could have with Angel City. And I think it is fine to have that process and to have that set up. But, and as we'll talk about with the rest of this roster, if a player is good and plays well, there should be the ability to win the spot. And I think we were approaching a spot here where if she doesn't get called into this camp and you go into the summer and she's just outplaying other players in NWSL head to head, then you have earned the spot no matter your age. But I think it's fair to say that to bring her along correctly and put her in a really good place, and obviously playing for Vlatko, you have a clear understanding as U.S. Soccer of where she stands, what she needs to work on, and where she's at in her development and what she needs to get to the next level, which Vlatko has very clear understanding of. I'm ecstatic to see her in this camp because I think she's the future. Like, I think she's the future of this position because of what I said, which is her two-way ability. And so she can pair with a lot of different pieces, which is something that I think is going to be key as you go forward and you have injuries and you have, absences and you have players maybe that aren't in form and you don't know always what that midfield will look like. And I think it's a skill set that doesn't totally exist in the camp. Now, that's something we have to talk about as well, because there are some pieces maybe in that position that haven't got called in, but I want to do one more, which is Tara McKeown. I think she is a huge piece in the future. And I think if you're Emma Hayes, you have to look at Washington and say, if I want to play soccer like Jonathan Heraldez wants to play soccer, then I need to be watching the players on that roster to see how they handle some of his tactical ideas. The big one being your ability to play out of the back and play through pressure. And I think we know McKeown physically can hold up. She's got the speed to cover over the top. She can win her 1v1 battles as a defender. And as that background as an attacker and that comfort in possession, as Washington becomes a more progressive team, I think this year, because Geraldes has the full offseason, this is a player that you can look at and say, this can be a ball-playing center back. And I think even with the gold medal win, when Davidson got hurt, you saw the gap for the U.S. in their comfort in playing out of the back. And I think McKeown can step in and be a huge part of that.
This is a good shout, Goss. Like, I love this call-up for McKeown and that she gets to play in games. This is a player that not only all the things that you just said, but she's only played center back for 2 years.
Yeah. It's wild.
She's a sponge. And that's why I think this is important, because she is willing to go into situations and say, teach me everything I need to learn. I am going to take that information and implement it as quickly as possible. That's the attitude you have to have. And this for a player like Tara McKeown, who has all of the technique and the physical capabilities, tactically there are just still places that she can get better. And I think she is going to leave this camp after these 3 games, and I hope she gets at least one full game in this camp. That is really the hope, that she gets one full 90 minutes, that she can say, all right, I need to work a little bit on my footwork in these defensive situations, my cover, whatever it may be. But I think she has a really bright future, and it's going to be a competitive spot there at that right center back spot, which it looks pretty competitive across the back line. I think she's going to really thrive in that and learn from the players around her. I'm really pumped. She had a great year, and she should be rewarded for that year, especially in a place where you can like go and perform and say, yes, it is about training, but like, what am I doing in a game? How can I make this team better? And she seems like she just wants to be a player that makes the team better. And
another player where these are high-stakes games, and you're wondering, okay, how will she react? Well, she faced off against Marta and Barbara Banda in an NWSL Cup not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, like, you have been in big moments. She obviously had the goal in the playoffs earlier on, but, like, all of those were high-leverage games. Sold-out crowds, big atmospheres, big pressure, and there's a lot of responsibility on that back line on her shoulders, specifically with the way those fullbacks in Washington attack. So she has shown at least that she will hang on, and she's a gamer, and like, you're going to get a pretty high floor from her in performance at this point of her career. And then the question, as you said, if what you can add is the ceiling going forward. Claude Copeland in the chat says excited to see more from Lily Johannes as well. I think that was the big name that popped to people when this roster came out. She finally picked the U.S. women's national team over the Netherlands a few months ago. Didn't get called into that late camp in 2024, and now gets the opportunity in 2025 to get on the field, and in a spot where it feels like there are some openings. So if it is what I said, filling in for Rose Lavelle as that 10, if it is playing as more of an 8 alongside some of these other pieces, I think there's real opportunity for Lily Johannes to step in here, and I think there should be a ton of excitement. Like, she is, like these other pieces, one for the future, and the future is very bright. Like, this is a young roster, but yet one where all of these players are legitimate pieces for the teams they play for every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the combinations of the players in the midfield is what I am intrigued about. What happens with Emma Hayes? Like, how does she combine Corbin, Lindsay, Lily, Sam, Claire? What does that look like? Is Jaden Shaw in there? Is Katarina Macario in there? I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, but I think that that's what this is about. Like, can we see, is it these 3 that really work well together? Is it these 3 with Shaw on the wing and she tucks in and they create a box, and that is the side that they try to advance the fullback? I don't know what that's going to look like, but when I see this roster with these players, the creativity, the good ball playing center midfielders, I'm very intrigued about what the makeup of the midfield is going to be from game to game, and with these opponents, it can be very different and still be productive. So there's a lot of things to like.
So I already asked the position on the depth or on the release, which let's step away from that. But you've got Ali Sentnor in this team. And you've got Yasmin Ryan, who we interviewed last week on the show, and we talked about, are you going to wear the number 10? So you've got a lot of pieces in this team that are 10s on their club. They all can't play there with this group. What do you make of sort of the idea of, okay, I'm going to take the best players and then move them out maybe to other positions? Obviously for Yasmin Ryan, it's not that unorthodox for her to get moved around. But this was something I think in the past we saw maybe too much of with the U.S. women's national team, was like, these are the 23 best players and then we'll put them on a team and then we'll figure it out. And everyone was a center forward and a 10 trying to play out on the wings and trying to play in deeper midfield positions and all of that. And I think that has been a problem for the U.S. in the past. What do you make of sort of the alignment of this group and whether or not going forward that is a problem or not?
It's a good question because I think that there are a lot of players on this team who play in multiple positions, right? You're talking about a winger and a 10 right now. And Shaw, Setnor, I even think Macario can play in 3 different positions.
Right.
She can play as a 9, a winger, or a 10. I want the best footballers on the field.
Okay.
And I think if you, in a way, Emma Hayes has talked about this too when she's describing players. She's like, they see the game really well. They understand where the space is coming. And if you're a player who during the game you're playing chess and you're like, okay, actually this chess piece, like I can move centrally to create space for a midfielder. And if the players around you see the game similarly, there is going to be a fluidity about the way that you play that is very difficult to defend.
Yeah.
I think it's more like that. Like, can Ali Setnor, I think she's going to play as a winger. I don't think she's going to play as a 10.
Yep.
Can she be productive in the channel and productive in the pocket? And can she find and decide the times where the channel is the place to be and to create space for other players, and maybe she doesn't even get the ball, but you're playing the game and you're making these decisions. And I think Emma Hayes wants players to have the autonomy, is that the right word? The ability to make these decisions on the field. Like, I'm going to give you a template, but you're going to make the decisions. To me, that feels like how Emma Hayes wants to coach, where these players are decision makers. So I don't, where in other roles with other coaches, I don't know if that's the case, right? It's like, play here and these are the 3 things we want you to do.
Right.
And if those aren't working out, it feels to me like players feel like, but I'm not doing what the coach wants me to do. And then you're in your head so much that you can't play freely.
Yeah. It's, I think that's totally fair. I also like that you asked me if that's the word when I asked you how to spell believes before we started here.
Did we spell it right, people?
I have zero idea. So like, I'm the expert in all of this.
We're such good communicators. That's why we have a podcast.
Exactly. We love the English language. We love what we do. I don't know. I put it up in all 3 spots and I don't know which one's right and which one's wrong. I think that's completely fair.
Yeah.
I would just say, and let's talk about some of the position battles that are interesting. I think this comes up in left back. This is like the biggest spot, which is, I do think having a specialist has value. Being an expert at a thing has value. Sometimes being an expert at being a left back, a defensive midfielder, is like, you 100% know that role. You may not be the best soccer player, but you 100% know that role. You know how to do your job inside of that role. And there is value in those moments. Left back is one of those positions. It has long been an issue for the U.S. women's national team. We've often seen converted players in there. Crystal Dunn gets called in. Crystal Dunn has not played since the Olympics, basically. She has now signed with PSG and left Gotham. I think we got that news right as we were finishing the show last week. Emily Fox has left Gotham to go join Arsenal as well. And then you'd assume Giselle Thompson is the third sort of option at this position that naturally plays there coming into this camp. So
and
that
Jenna
is
Neiswanger, correct?
Yeah, I said Jenna Neiswanger.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
I thought you said Emily Fox.
Oh, maybe I did because of Arsenal. So Jenna Neiswanger is the left back. Emily Fox will be the right back.
Yeah.
So you have a player in Crystal Dunn who hasn't played since the gold medal. You have a player in Jenna Neiswanger who lost her starting spot and then went over and is now trying to establish herself. And then Giselle Thompson, who's probably the most prospect pick in this roster of probably not there today to play for the national team. And one of the issues for Jenna Neiswanger getting into this is that she's not a left back. Like, she hadn't played that in her career, so she's
Right.
learning the position. The things she does well, she does elite because she's a winger. And so she's able to create chances and push forward, struggles to defend. Didn't start at the Olympics, got some opportunities off the bench in the European friendlies and all of that, and then lost her spot with her club team and is now trying to reestablish herself. I think this is one of the positions to watch, who gets the minutes and how do they look. But it's also one of the ones where it gets a little muddled for me in terms of what the plan is at this spot and what Emma Hayes is looking for.
Do you think that this is why she brought all three of them in?
I think
Because
this
of
is
what
why
you just
Giselle
said?
Thompson gets a call, a player like her at this position rather than someone in a similar situation, rather than Olivia Moutre, right? She's not getting called in, even if you say her distance from the national team is similar to Giselle Thompson's, because there's no space in that position. But I think there are veterans. I mean, look at the championship. Casey Kruger and Carrie Bello. Both are Americans and both are left backs. Kruger, I don't know. I'm just guessing. It feels like there is like a let her get a breath. She went straight from the championship
Yeah.
to those European friendlies. And so, like, fine, you know who she is. You know what you're going to get from her. But I think a Bello is an odd one to miss here. I think Ellie Wheeler is ahead of Giselle Thompson today as a soccer player, but still has potential to get better in the future. And I think Alyssa Mallinson is one that she got called into that January camp. So Emma Hayes has seen her in person, and we weren't there, so we don't know what she saw. But I think those are players where you look at it and say, today they're closer to being starters for this group than some of the pieces you've brought in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with Mallinson, she's seen her play in a couple, now that she has a couple of caps. Maybe she's like, okay, well, I've seen her play. Now I want to see Giselle Thompson
Right.
play. And maybe you bring Giselle Thompson into a camp that is competitive like this one with her sister, just to give her like some comfort level
Yeah.
into something very new. I'm not saying those other games wouldn't have been that same thing, but I don't know why. I think Giselle Thompson for me is the one that I'm most curious about. That has to be more reliant on what happened at youth level, right, at the 20s, and how her performance there showed Emma Hayes something that she can play in these situations and be effective. Now can she do it with the national team? Because as you would expect, she was a little up and down this last year. And one of the things that Giselle Thompson is going to have to work on, just as Alyssa Thompson had to work on after her rookie year, is can she play for 90 minutes?
Yeah.
If you're going to be a left back, you have to play for 90 minutes. I think that those players got called in. One, I think we talked about why Crystal maybe is in that role because of her experience and the World Cups that she's won, the Olympics that she's won. Can you help mentor these players? But now I kind of feel like it's an added for her, because now Crystal has not been playing that much.
Yeah.
And now she's at a new team, and now can you reestablish yourself as the left back in this team, which she did in 2019, and said, hey, I could play anywhere, but I'm going to be the left back for this squad. It's interesting to me, this left back situation and who was chosen and who wasn't chosen. I think, I know you were mentioning this as a snub, and so I'll just throw it out there. Like, I think Carrie Bello had a great season and probably should have deserved to be called into this over a player like Giselle Thompson. But are you going to go with an 18-year-old or are you going to go with a 25-year-old? At this camp right now, maybe you're saying, I'm going to bring all these youth players in to see how they perform, because if they're not ready in 2.5 years to play in the World Cup, they're going to have the next cycle.
Yeah.
Maybe Carrie Bello comes in the next camp because you're like, okay, now we kind of see where those players are at. Now we got to evaluate where a player is who maybe their lifetime with the national team is a little shorter, and we got to see if, hey, can she play here right now?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a really interesting idea about this camp and how she's utilizing it and the players that were called in and weren't. Because I think what we're seeing too is there's a lot of players who are performing well and could be in this group.
Right. Which is what you want, and it's always
Yes.
going to be the case. What you're talking about in terms of how you're using the camps is part of why they had the January camp, I think, right? To
Okay.
have
Yeah.
the futures camp, to have a January camp outside of the national team games to get other players called in. And it's where you want to see a lot of those players called in. And Obviously, there were some findings there that we didn't get to see. So
Yeah, but it's hard when you don't have a competitive game.
Right, because that's the part you're judging someone on. Is like you're understanding what they're like in training and their personality, but to see, okay, how are you going to scrap? How are you going to make performances happen? Stuff like that.
And that's too from me, who I was called into camps without games. And I'm like, well, let me just play in a game, Like, how are you going to... That's frustrating as a player, too. Like, you're very happy about it. But if at the end of the day, you're going to be on this team because you win or lose games and you're not playing a game, it's like, man, I want to be in these camps where something is on the line and it matters.
It would be interesting. We haven't done this conversation yet, so we should probably start asking people. But January camp was obviously new for the U.S. women's national team. It's common on the U.S. men's national team side. I am curious how early players understood it was happening, therefore what type of shape they were able to keep themselves in or get in. Because I think for some players I know on the men's side, like they get conversations being like, well, we know January camp's happening. I'm in this pool, so I'm going to make sure I'm there at that stage.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like, I think the concept of it being players like it was this year where it's like up and coming players, I think that concept is new. But I went into a January camp without, and that was in 2010, 2011. I think that was always just a camp that then that happened. But because this is, again, CBA stuff, because of the CBA, you couldn't call all those players in.
Yeah.
So it is a new concept in that regard. And yeah, you're like coming off a season, need rest, but then you're like, oh, also I have to prepare to be at a national team camp and play the best I can.
You can't scale too far back on your physical conditioning, but you also have to scale back to an extent so you don't get hurt for the next year and manage that. I think it's a great idea. I love the camp. I love the futures part of it because clearly a lot of those pieces playing against, whether it was in training or just watching them, they have been able to earn spots into this group. And that's, I think, where you get the trust from Emma Hayes to say, yeah, I can trust these U20 players because I have seen them, I've been around them, and all of that. And a huge part of that is going to be, I think, one of the other big battles, which is central midfield. Corbin Albert's gotten a lot of opportunities in this group. It worked out in the Olympics. I think from the Olympics through, and you add the last few friendlies in, she's been fine, but not a floor raiser for this team. And so now you reach the point where you bring a Claire Hutton into this group. You get an opportunity there. Obviously, Sam Coffey will get the start. And then is there a 10 and is Lindsay Heaps going to be the second 8? Or is Lindsay playing in the attacking positions? And then you have to find someone else to play in central midfield. I think that's another huge sort of battle spot in this team that I'm watching out for. And I think we're going to learn a lot about over the course of this window. Let's finish off with some of the snubs, I think. We talked about left back. I think that's one of the big positions where you talk about that, partially because it is such an open position. But I think central midfield's another spot. I think Hal Hirschfeld and Taylor Flint are two that should be really frustrated that they're not in this team. And maybe we'll learn a little bit more on Hal Hirschfeld's side of things because she has been around the camp, that maybe there was something, an injury or something about it that she wasn't available. But she seems like a piece that could come in and fill these roles. A two-way central midfielder, once again, can play a little bit more of a 6 if you need to with some support, or can be the 8 that pushes forward and covers ground. And I thought Taylor Flint was maybe the best defensive midfielder in NWSL. Obviously, Sam Coffey was in and out with national team, so didn't have as many games this year. But I think what I saw at Louisville, especially the ability to play through balls from a deep position. You talk about the national team and like the options you're going to have on the end of that. It feels like a really clean fit for her.
I agree with you with Hal, and I think part of my brain was like, okay, well, there's not really actually Washington players on this team, but then Tara McKeown is on the team, so you're like, okay, well, maybe, I don't know. That was my big thing. Like maybe they just weren't coming because
we assumed Trinity Rodman injury, so wasn't going to come to this as many of the as none of the triple espresso is.
Yeah. I think we know enough about Hal Hirschfeld to know why she should be on this list, and maybe there's a reason, right, that she is not on this roster. Taylor Flint was phenomenal in Louisville this year, and it was a new position for her. She has played as an advanced, like she's a 6'10".
Yeah.
Like she plays the number 10. But now they utilize, Bev Yanez was like, actually, like all these skills you have are going to be so well, they're going to fit so well as a 6. And maybe it's just going to take a little bit more time to see her at a 6 for Emma Hayes to be like, all right, can you compete in this group? Because you can't, I mean, I don't know, maybe you bring her as a training player, but is it beneficial for her to be as a training player in this environment when like she's a leader on the Louisville team who kind of need her? And I don't know. I don't know what conversations were had or if she was a part of that preliminary like list. But I think Taylor Flint, as you said, an awesome ball playing 6, but she led the league in tackles and blocks and in blocking passes into the front line. Like she was so good in the defensive role as a 6 in the league. That's a big snub, but I would like to know like who is being talked to on the, like, you know, is there talk with her? I just do think that she has finally found her position, which for her means maybe there's only up from here, right? She's only going to get better at this. But those two, it's interesting that they're not in the mix.
Yeah, it is, because they're also both in a weird spot of like how Hirschfeld's a young player, but with her college experience, not on the same timeline as the young pieces in this team. And then Flint, you talk about being young at her position. And so again, in a weird timeline in a team where it feels like it's locked in veterans / really, really young pieces. I think Ashley Sanchez goes into that same conversation of, you've seen a lot of her and you don't know what the ceiling is there at a national team level. I think playing with Jaden Shaw week in and week out is going to be really big for her chance to make the national team, because if that's a connection that exists the way I think it will, like that's something you can't ignore if you're on MA's staff.
Agree. I think Ashley Sanchez is a phenomenal talent. What I think that she needs to prove over the next few months is last year she had a role with North Carolina that actually demanded a lot more defensively out of her than we've ever seen. And she had to perform that. Like she had to do those defensive responsibilities. I think she just still needs growth in that. And this is, if you're playing on the national team, you have to attack with the same mentality that you defend with, and vice versa. And I think that as she improves her defensive side, it's only going to allow her to be more effective on the attacking side, which is going to, in the end, she's going to flourish, right? Because attacking is that is what she is awesome at. I think she is a snub, but I feel like her growth in her defensive side is going to put her in a spot where if she just continues to focus on that, things on the attacking side will work and she'll be in this mix. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I think it makes sense as well to say, like, let's see a little bit more from you in North Carolina, and let's see where year 2 goes. And so I think that's completely reasonable, as well as she is probably going to be a player who is affected by, okay, who is injured, who is out. Like, it's the deepest position. It's one of the deepest positions. There's a lot of options. So I think the makeup of each camp is going to pop up. One of the other names that popped in my head, Ella Stevens. I think she has a chance this year as a full-time starter for Gotham to earn the spot. It's tough to sort of break through at that role when last year she was electric when she was on the field. She wasn't always on the field. She was obviously part of the January camp. So Emma Hayes got to see her in person, but didn't feel like she was ready to break through into this group. And I think that's reasonable and fair. Again, one with the weird timeline of she's now breaking through as a starter, but she's 27 and some of these players are 20 and 21. She's in a similar spot as them, but maybe doesn't have the same future long-term for the national team. Last one I will bring up, and it will bring us into our next topic, is Abby Dahlkemper. Abby Dahlkemper changed Bay FC when she got there as a center back, as an organizer, as a leader, as a ball winner. Like, for her, it's been injuries a lot over the last few years, and so you are hoping that she stays healthy. Do you think she is on the road to getting back into this convo, or is it one of those situations where we do look back at players' careers and say the national team window closed and it just always stayed closed?
I never say never because you just don't know, right? But it does seem to me with the amount of quality center backs that are coming up through NWSL that it's going to be difficult for Abby Dahlkemper to get herself back in this mix because of what you just said. Like, Unfortunately, she's on the older side. Unfortunately, she's dealt with a few injuries. And the more demand you put on a player who is injury prone, the more likelihood is that you get injured, right? So I think now you see a player like Tara McKeown have her opportunity because Abby Dahlkemper is, performing great. And you could still be a great player and not be in the national team.
100%.
And I agree with you. I thought we finally saw Abby Dahlkemper back at 100% after that back injury when she got to Bay, and it felt like she was playing free and she had her voice and didn't really have to play in Gurma's shadow a little bit and could be the leader of the back line, which has nothing to do with no slight on Gurma. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so I think she performed really well. I would just say I would rather personally see what Emily Sams could do, what Tara McKeown can do, because you kind of have a good mix of Davidson and Gurma that are your go-to players. Now can you get a couple younger players in that mix who start to push and say, all right, I'm coming for that spot? That would be my look. But performance-wise, Abby Dahlkemper did well. And I think you can rightfully call her a snub if this conversation comes up. But I think in the mentality of Emma Hayes, I understand why that was not utilized, why she wasn't utilized.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the hardest team in the world to get into. Yeah. As many times as I can write soccer-wise in our little bottom lines. It's the hardest team in the world to get into for a reason. Gold medal champions at this point. This is all in the road to 2027. It feels, and I think we should state this, and you did at the beginning, and I'm going to restate at the end, is Emma Hayes is giving a lot of people opportunities. There are a lot of camps. She has a very clear understanding of the calendar and the timeline. So I don't think a single player we talked about in this wasn't in the conversation and won't be back in the conversation if they perform well enough. And it's hard right now because you come off an NWSL season and most of these players haven't played since then. So it's hard to move up the rankings when you're not on the field and you're not performing. Let's dig into Bay FC, and one of the reasons that Abby Dahlkemper comes up is from the moment she arrived, this team became a defensive force. So for a team that was opening up games and 4-3 and 3-3 and everything like that and didn't have a tie for the first half of the season, you go into September, you go to Portland, you give up 1 goal and a 3-1 win. You then beat Louisville 1-0. You tie North Carolina 1-1. You lose to Orlando 1-0. You beat Seattle 1-0. That was the run they went on in the middle of the season to push themselves into a playoff spot. They then went on a run at the end of the year in which they only conceded more than 1 goal one time. And then they go to Washington and they take the lead and they end up not being able to hold on in the postseason. Bay was maybe the team that finished the year different than they started. And they probably are one that wished the season went 12 months instead of what it ended up being. But they were a fascinating story in their first year, Jordan. It's hard to think that was their expansion year. Like, the name's been around for a while. It's obviously such a soccer-rich area. There was so much excitement going into the season. But they finally found, it felt like, their identity and stabilized as the year went along.
It's hard to be an expansion team in this league because you have to hit the ground running and you have to build properly. You have to get the right mixture of veterans with new players and flashy players. And when we saw Bay build, it was the emphasis, yes, was on some veterans in the league to stabilize the back line, but it was all about who is going forward. And the big signings were Tens and a winger in Kundananji and Oshiwala. And is that always translating? It didn't, right? It was at the beginning of the year very difficult for this Bay team to be prominent in the attack, but also to keep goals out of the back of their net. Like, those were 7-goal games at the beginning of the year. I think how they built was interesting, being so focused on the attack at the beginning, then changing into the middle of the season and saying, now we're so focused on defense. And then they weren't scoring goals. Yeah. And then they were like, okay, now let's find the happy medium. The happy medium came because they found Abby Dahlkemper as well. And the vocal veteran presence in the back line alongside Emily Menges, it worked. Those two were so solid in what they did. So I think for Bay, as they progress this year, some of the things they're going to try to do is be more like the team that I think Albertine Montoya wants them to be. They were so good in transition last year. That is where they really excelled. I think that's not how they want to play. If I know anything about Albertine Montoya, he wants the ball. He wants to play through his midfield. He wants to utilize every channel of the field in attacks. Will there be times where it's quick and you can go to that quick transition? Yes, of course. But he wants to play football. He wants to have the ball more than the other team and have a really nice possession style. For me, from the first year to the second year, that's probably the biggest thing I would imagine Bay is focusing on, since they finally got the defensive responsibility piece right towards the end of the year. Now they can say, okay, now that we're solid here, how can we build and be better in possession, in the way that we attack our style of play?
Yeah. What you talk about the first half of the year, most of the year, was reactive. It was, can we have moments where we pop out in transition, but we don't create those moments? We sort of try and take advantage when they come. And then sitting a little deeper in a block again is reactive. The other team's going to set the tone of the game. Can we hang on and survive? And not survival, because clean lines, like you can go out and win a ton of games sitting in a block. But if you want that control, you need to be able to play a little bit more expansive. And that feels like the next step for Bay FC. Right. We had Pardeep Khatri on the show, and she talked about Rachel Kunananji at Media Day and said she was the star of Media Day, but also talked about her transition, her experience into this league, and how much more comfortable she feels now. And I think we saw that at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And that was an aspect that was missing, in that teams didn't have that fear factor the way you expected based off the transfer fees paid for the two players up top. And it didn't open up the space for teammates as much as you'd hope. And it feels like this year that's going to be back, or that's going to be an element. Yeah. And so teams are going to have to leave an extra number to that side of the field, or they're going to have to sit a little bit deeper. They're not going to push their fullback into the attack as much. Like, all of these things that a player at that level can affect, and Oshoala as well being a part of that attacking front. And then you move into central midfield, where the two big additions for them have been out of college. No draft anymore. We've talked about it over and over again. And so it allows teams that maybe finish in the playoffs to still go out and get game changers that maybe they wouldn't be available to them in a draft. And the two players picked up Taylor Huff from Florida State, 3-time All-American, more of an attacking midfielder, but a central player who can take advantage of possession, make it hurt other teams, also kill teams in transition out of that central area. And then Hannah Bebar out of Duke, who is 23 years old, called into the full national team for that January camp as a replacement for, I think it was Lynn Biondolo, who got injured early in that camp. And so brought in as one of the numbers, the only college player brought into the full national team camp, not the futures camp. So you're adding those two pieces to a central midfield that was the weakest part of this team last year. And part of that was Castellanos not fitting in. Yeah. Part of that was injuries to Larea. So all of a sudden, this weakness could become a strength for this team. And it feels like it fits more into the style that this club wants to play.
Yeah, it really does. And it provides, you also trade Alex Lueta. So Alex Lueta, who's one of the best sixes in this league, coming back from an ACL, she gets traded to Utah. You create some space in the midfield for these two players, especially Bibar, who's going to challenge Kiki Pickett, right? Kiki Pickett did great. Jumping in as a six, so this is a girl who knows the game and can understand defensive spaces and how to mitigate attacks from the other team. But now you're adding competition in that spot at a really high level. And I think Huff is a player that can help you progress the ball to get Tess Bodie a little bit more included in the game, and can round out a midfield where now you have bite, you have a player that is good on the dribble with penetrating passes, and you have just a real creative Tess Bodie type who likes to float and find spaces. That midfield could be really dominant. And also, I do want to add, they added Carly Lima too, who played for Cal, and this is a young player who had 16 goals last year, and it just in the fall, in one season, 16 goals, pacey, can penetrate. Now, is there balance on this on this team where you say, okay, Kundananji's over here, and as you just mentioned, maybe the outside back on the right side stays back because they know Rachel Kundananji's coming down the left side. But now you have Lima, who gives you that same exact thing on the other side. And this is a player that Albertine Montoya has known for a long time. Grew up in MVLA, his club in the Bay Area. He has seen her progress. He probably knows exactly how she trains, exactly her mentality, what he can get out of her. So this isn't just like she scored 16 goals. This is a player that he knows can be useful in this squad now. And that tells me like, okay, Bay is thinking about still being pretty quick in the way that they progress, but is the nine's role a little different? Is maybe that Tess Bodie playing at the 9 to be a little bit more of a false 9 in situations to allow those players a little bit more space?
I would throw out, by the way, a reminder that Penelope Hawking traded in the middle of the year and then signed to a full extension.
Yes, and Penelope Hawking is a really interesting piece to add to that mix as well. I'm interested. College players coming into NWSL has not always been a home run. You can look at Bay last year. They pick Maya Doms, I think the 8th pick in the draft. She barely played for them, right?
And Savvy King.
And Savvy King, who they ended up trading to Angel City. I think these players could have an impact. But I think I'm also curious, you bring these players in and you're signing all 3 of them to 3-year deals, Goss. That is,
that's the new reality.
To me, that's really interesting because you have no idea how they're going to play in this situation. Where, as before, you would get drafted, you'd go into preseason, typically you play a little bit, they'd see how you are in the camp, and then you would sign your contract. Like, this feels to me like a lot of these players are, and maybe that is the case. I'm not in these preseasons, so I don't know how much they have or have not played, but I think there's a lot of risk being put on these young college players, and they're giving them these big contracts. And this is not just Bay, this is all over the league. I am curious how that is going to work out, or if there is really like, hey, we are committed to you for 3 years, so for 3 years we're going to do everything we can to make you a starter on this team. I don't know. I'm interested in the I guess the soccer building, the team building side of this thing too. Because we've seen hit or miss college players. So that was a side tangent, and it just happened to be about Bay, but I think it's true in the league right now where when you have guaranteed contracts, is that going to work out for every single player that you sign coming out of college on a 3-year deal? I don't know.
It's part of the new CBA is the power of the player, and so therefore the influence from the club has to come with guarantees, whether it's years, whether it's money, whether it's opportunity, whether it's training facilities, off the field stuff that you can give to make a player more comfortable, whatever it is. That's sort of now the debate, or that's the challenge for teams to try and get ahead. I don't think specifically Hannah Bebar has been with the group. I think she's finishing her master's.
Yeah, she is in college still.
Yeah, so she's not even going to be, I think, fully part of preseason. So that is like a signing, but 23-year-old. So when you look at the players you've seen, and then obviously the opportunity with the national team, but like your hope is she is more on the Hal Hirschfeld side of things, which is sort of ready to step in because of your experience. And obviously it's tough to bring up Washington in this conversation because they hit a home run last year with the last year of the draft. And
I'll just say again, I'm not speaking specifically to these Bay players. I'm speaking in general. I don't know how this is going to work out. And I think we're all learning at the same time. Like, is this the move? Do you sign college players to long-year deals? Or do you sign college players to 1-year deals with an option year? And I don't know. I don't know. Are option years even included really anymore? Because it has to be mutual. I know they are, but like, it just is interesting to me on the roster building side of things, the longevity of these contracts for young players.
It's going to be, I think, a huge learning process for front offices, for coaches, for agents, for players, of what works and what doesn't. And I do think it's one of those things. We were asked this question every single show from the moment the CBA happened on, which was, with no draft, how are smaller markets going to compete? That is probably the gap that will be created is if I am Gotham or Orlando or Washington, and my option to sign a central midfielder is X international currently or college player, I'm probably not going to guarantee as much to a college player. And then if you are a Louisville or a Utah, although Utah has signed 30,000 international center mids, you can go in and say, listen, we have opportunity here and we will invest in you. We will give you a 2 or 3 year deal when they would only offer you a 1 year deal. That's probably the breakdown that you get to. And the hope is that your scouting is good enough that you're picking the right pieces and the right pieces to fit your system. I think that's my exciting part of no draft is like, if you're a player who's like, this is the soccer that makes me feel most comfortable, this is what I want to play in, you can go and find that club if that feeling is mutual. And I think that's what we're seeing in the North Carolina players going out to Seattle and then USC players going out to North Carolina is like, this is not regional or comfort. This is, we are trying to find a soccer team that we want to be a part of, whether it's from a culture or a style point of view. And the hope is that Bay have hit on this here, because I do think the one thing is signing 3 players like this with the way the team finished, because they had some of the least turnover of any team. We talked about the biggest players leaving were all players that didn't play last year, whether it was for injuries or for, lack of comfort and fitting in. So all of these players are a bonus. And if anyone hits quickly, that's probably all Bay needs to take the next step to be a consistent top 6 team this year or into a top 5, top 4 conversation. So it's a really good place to be in for this club. And I think part of it goes down to the money they spent last year to bring in some of the biggest names in the attack who have finally found the comfort. And then obviously the Dahl Kemper move and the moves they've made around the margins to find some pieces that can be consistent. I think Kiki Pickett now you look at and say, she's an option at 3 or 4 positions.
Yeah.
If you can find someone who can consistently play in center mid, she's your first option at outside fullback. She can fill in any of the central midfield roles. So it makes this team so much deeper while just adding potentially 1 starter to this group.
Yeah, no, it's good points. And I think that the comfort level of the players that were the big signings is going to be the big thing. Dana Castellanos is now in Portland. So you're thinking more about Kunananji and Oshuala. This team could be very dangerous, one, just with Rachel Kunananji and what she can do and how on fire she was. But I am most curious about how Asisa Oshuala is going to be this year. Because if she clicks and she becomes, the goal scorer that she has always been in every team that she is with, and then you add all those pieces in that can help feed her the ball better, that's a scary team to play against.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I guess we should have said that's the real ceiling. The ceiling pushes 2 of the biggest signings in the history of the world and 2 of the best players in the history of the world performing at their level. And I think that's what we started to see towards the end of last year and in the playoffs was not just performance, but like a comfort with the game and the way it was played. And then you start to see their best aspects, right? As Kundananji decided, I'm going to wait for defenders to come in so that I can then go and beat them rather than trying to play early. All of a sudden you saw the best of her. And I think Oshuala starting to read her teammates a little bit more and decide where her early runs were going to be and which center back she was going to pull out of position. Then you start to see like, oh, this is why you spend all that money.
I thought you were going to say, is Kundananji going to wait to see if defenders are going to come and just stand on the ball?
Yeah, I know. That's a level of comfort. That is a level of comfort to have on a professional field that very few human beings will ever have in their entire life. All right, that's all for us here on this episode. We're going to potentially dig into Gotham for the 300th time as another thing comes out about what's going on there. But luckily enough, we can save that for next week, as we had a lot of national team conversation to talk about. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you to all of you for joining us live. Thank you to all of you for listening via podcast. Remember, get into the Discord. Send us all your messages on your thoughts. We'll continue to talk about all of it as we head towards the 2025 NWSL season. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.